and welcome back to Banjo Strings and Drinking Chords, the podcast of the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. I'm Rachel, and today our guest, Makayla Baker Paxton, is here to talk to us about the historical aspect of a very current topic, vaccines. You may have heard Makayla previously on the podcast in our malaria and our midwifery episodes, but if you haven't, be sure to check those out. Welcome back, Makayla.
Glad to be back.
So, why are we talking about vaccines in a history podcast? What's the timeline for vaccine development?
Well, obviously there is a timeline of experimentation concerning vaccines, so therefore it has a history all on its own. Vaccines date back several hundreds of years, but it wasn't always known as a vaccine. The first immunizations were typically in the form of inoculation. The earliest hints of inoculation is believed to have been performed around 200 BC, originating out of China and India.
That's much earlier than most people probably expect. Now, what's the difference between early vaccines and modern? Or can you even define the difference between immunization, inoculation, and vaccination?
Some use the terms immunization, inoculation, and vaccination synonymously, but there are vast differences among these three terms. Immunization is any process in which the body is able to adapt and fight against infectious agents. Our bodies have immunological memories, which basically means that if you get infected with a virus, your body will remember the foreign germ and fight against it. In the past, for most people, immunization was solely obtained by contracting the disease and surviving. Inoculation was history's answer to the immunization problem. Inoculation is a procedure in which immunization is obtained through artificial means. In early Chinese, African, and Indian medicine, inoculation for smallpox was performed by blowing smallpox scabs up one's nose.
That's gross.
While the inoculated still got sick, the symptoms were less severe and death tolls were much less prominent. However, inoculation is still not a perfect solution. Those inoculated can still cause an epidemic. Vaccines, on the other hand, according to the CDC, are preparations used to stimulate the body's immune response against disease. Vaccines today are usually administered via needle injection, but there are oral and nasal vaccinations as well. The first vaccine was created for smallpox in 1796 by Edward Jenner, a British physician and scientist. Edward Jenner, the inventor of the first vaccine, observed milkmaids who often contracted cowpox, a virus very similar to the infamous and fatal smallpox. These milkmaids seemed to have immunity against smallpox after having cowpox. Jenner intentionally infected a young boy named James Phipps by scraping pus from a milkmaid's cowpox blister and transferring it to James.
We probably should have actually put a quick disclaimer about how this podcast is going to get a little gross. But back to the topic, were any specific cultures or groups that were experimenting at that time, or was it largely a wide-scale scientific endeavor?
It has always been a collective endeavor for most cultures to find ways to cure and especially prevent diseases. In 1600s China, Emperor Fulin passed away from smallpox, leaving the throne to his third son, Kangxi. Kangxi became a prominent advocate for smallpox inoculation and even had his children inoculated. Kangxi wrote to his children, quote, "The method of inoculation having been brought to light during my reign, I had it used upon you, my sons and daughters, and you all passed through the smallpox in the happiest possible manner. The courage which I summoned up to insist on its practice has saved the lives and the health of millions of men. This is an extremely important thing of which I'm very proud." End quote. Western and Central Sudan, Ethiopia, and Southern Africa are also accredited for early experimentation with inoculation. Many enslaved Africans brought the practice of inoculation to America. For example, Cotton Mather, the infamous New England Puritan clergyman, was gifted by his congregation an enslaved African man named Onesimus. Onesimus made Mather aware of smallpox inoculation practices in Africa. Mather wrote, quote, "Inquiring of my Negro man Onesimus, who was a pretty intelligent fellow, whether he ever had the smallpox, he answered both yes and no, and then told me that he had undergone an operation which had given him something of the smallpox, and would forever preserve him from it, adding that it was often used among the Garametes, and whoever had the courage to use it was forever free from the fear of contagion. He described the operation to me and showed me in his arm the scar." End quote. Mather had Onesimus inoculate him, and later Mather attempted to campaign on behalf of the smallpox inoculation during the 1721 outbreak in Boston. Unfortunately, the citizens of Boston were skeptical of the African method, claiming it was immoral to work against God's will. However, some doctors paid heed to Mather's plea and inoculated their patients, with a total of 280 individuals being inoculated during the 1721 outbreak.
So you mentioned smallpox. What kind of diseases were early immunologists looking at?
Well, obviously, smallpox started this whole vaccine train. Smallpox, also known as the variola-virus, causes gruesome blister bumps to arise in the skin, as well as ulcers to form in the mouth. Smallpox is often accompanied with fever and vomiting. Smallpox can leave lifelong traces, including ghastly scarring and possible blindness. You can see in several portraits of Queen Elizabeth I in which she has pockmark scars. Smallpox devastated the ancient world, but in particular, it almost completely eradicated whole Native American communities. But after the discovery of the smallpox vaccination, other diseases like yellow fever, cholera, rabies, typhoid fever, measles, diphtheria, and polio became main concerns for immunization.
So essentially diseases that today we have vaccines for and have largely stamped out. Most people aren't getting those illnesses unless it's in a situation of limited sanitation and medicine.
Right. Sanitation and immunization go hand in hand to stamp out disease. For example, we do have a cholera vaccine. Cholera is a disease that triggers infection in the small intestine, usually caused by inadequate or contaminated drinking water. In 2010, Haiti experienced a catastrophic earthquake. After the earthquake, over 1 million people were displaced from their homes. The earthquake left poor sanitary environments and created pockets of brackish water. Cholera struck hard following the earthquake, with over 820,000 cases and almost 10,000 deaths. It was one of the most devastating epidemics in modern history. In 2012, a campaign for an oral cholera vaccine for Haiti was launched. Armed with hygiene education, improved water sanitation, and vaccinations, Haiti today is experiencing the benefits of an almost cholera-free country.
So you've done a lot of research into this. Are there any specific historic records of immunization you'd like to share?
Yeah, so there's two in particular that I find really compelling. So the new series, Hulu series, The Great, depicts Catherine the Great getting inoculated in a heightened, semi-fictional fashion. But honestly, the truth is that Catherine the Great really was secretly inoculated. Catherine, extremely anxious about contracting smallpox, invited physician Thomas Jefferson to the palace. During his stay, a young child stricken with smallpox was smuggled into the palace. Dimmesdale successfully managed to inoculate Catherine. However, Catherine did keep a carriage nearby for Dimmesdale to escape in case it did fail, and the Russian people took out their frustrations on Dimmesdale. Catherine later publicly announced her inoculation in 1768 and urged other royals to receive immunization. Catherine wrote, quote, "There is no noble house in which there are not several vaccinated persons, and many regret that they had smallpox naturally and so cannot be fashionable." End quote. In another letter she wrote, quote, "Such inoculation should be common everywhere, and it is now all the more convenient, since there are doctors and medical attendants in nearly all districts, and does not call for huge expenditure." End quote. The other compelling incident was actually George Washington's vaccination mandate on his troops in 1775. Washington himself had contracted smallpox as a teenager and was left with gruesome pockmarks. During the summer of 1775, smallpox was sweeping through the colonies with high death tolls. Continental troops in Quebec suffered at the hand of smallpox, leaving a large gap in the patriotic cause. Washington feared the speckled monster, as it was known, and so Washington decided to take a huge risk. Like I said before, if one is inoculated, there is still risk of spreading disease during recovery and causing a small epidemic. Washington, though concerned with losing troop members, decided to mandate inoculation for his troops, coupled with a strict isolation following the procedure. The experiment proved to be successful.
So how is this new idea of injecting or infecting live diseases into healthy bodies, which admittedly sounds somewhat counterintuitive, greeted by the general public? Was there as much of a backlash and refusal as is happening with COVID-19?
History has this uncanny ability to repeat itself. So yes, there were moments of rejection and fear of the early vaccine. There were many who doubted Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine discovery. In fact, Jenner's report was rejected by the British Royal Society, so Jenner himself decided to self-publish his own pamphlet called An Inquiry into the Causes and Effects of the Variola Vaccine, a disease discovered in some western counties of England, particularly Gloucestershire, and known by the name of the cowpox. What a title. Even still, Jenner's work still didn't receive any significant recognition until a contemporary of his demonstrated the same results and praised Jenner's discovery. Once Jenner's vaccine gained footing, England began enforcing smallpox vaccinations, especially for young children who are more susceptible to the disease. Vegetarian and nonconformist groups like the Unitarians, Quakers, and others were the leaders in the anti-vaccination movement. Much of the early vegetarian movement encouraged fresh air, water, and obviously a vegetarian diet to combat diseases. One of the most prominent leaders for the anti-vaccination campaign in the United States was Laura Little. In 1896, Little's son Kenneth passed away after receiving his smallpox vaccination. According to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia notes, it states, quote, Mrs. Little's son Kenneth was vaccinated in September 1895 and died in April 1896. Between the time of inoculation and death, he suffered recurrent ear and throat infections, measles, and diphtheria. The latter was the ultimate cause of his death. Mrs. Little pointed to the artificial pollution of the blood that fatally weakened his constitution and left him at the mercy of the subsequent infections, end quote. Little then made it her lifelong goal to eradicate vaccinations. Little wrote to several magazines and newspapers preaching the gospel of healthy diets to prevent disease, including cancer. She later self-published a book entitled Crimes of the Cowpox Ring, Some Moving Pictures Thrown on the Dead Wall of Official Science.
That's a little melodramatic.
I don't mean to laugh. Little managed to garner enough support to help pass an anti-vaccination law in Minnesota in 1903, which allowed children to attend school even if they are not vaccinated. Unfortunately, Minnesota experienced a smallpox epidemic shortly after.
Gee, I wonder if that might have been linked. So, how did communities deal with the development of inoculations and vaccines? Did they jump at the chance to knock out diseases affecting their populations, or was there any sort of politicization of the science?
The United States, for the most part, has been in support of vaccine mandates. In 1800, soon-to-be President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, was in correspondence with his former roommate, Benjamin Waterhouse, about the newly developed smallpox vaccination. Waterhouse himself was a physician and had vaccinated his own children. Jefferson wrote, quote, I had before attended to your publications on the subject in the newspapers, and took much interest in the results of the experiments you were making. Every friend of humanity must look with pleasure on this discovery, by which one evil more is withdrawn from the condition of man, and must contemplate the possibility that future improvements and discoveries may still more and more lessen the catalogue of evils. In this line of proceeding you deserve well of your country. Waterhouse managed to demonstrate an experiment at the Boston Board of Health in which he gathered 21 volunteer boys, 19 vaccinated and 2 unvaccinated. With exposure to the disease, the vaccinated boys remained healthy while the 2 unvaccinated contracted the virus. Shortly after this experimentation, the United States Congress established the United States Vaccine Agency in 1813. In doing so, Congress made it so that shipping of smallpox vaccines to communities was free, which allowed for widespread immunity. The first school vaccination mandate occurred in Massachusetts in 1855, which later rolled into a United States Supreme Court case in 1905, arguing the constitutional rights of vaccine mandates. Massachusetts won the case. By the 1920s, schools were mandating vaccines for children in order for them to attend. I recently read in the history of Augusta County that Augusta Female Seminary, presently known as Mary Baldwin University, required their students to be vaccinated against smallpox before attending school. In 1922, one case was considered by the United States Supreme Court on behalf of Rosalind Zucht, a student in Texas who was not allowed to attend school due to her lack of vaccination. In the end, the court decided to dismiss the case, stating that, quote, it was within the police power of the state to provide for compulsory vaccination, end quote. Anti-vaccination opposition remained steady all through the 20th and 21st centuries. Some oppositions have led to armed mobs like the one in Georgetown, Delaware in 1926. Emergence of any massive vaccination policy has instilled fear into the souls of many people. Why, you may ask? It's a complicated answer, to be honest. The issue mainly adheres to one's belief or doubt in the government, religious, and health beliefs.
And yet, have any of the diseases with which vaccines have been created been eradicated, and can we tie that to mandated treatments?
So glad you asked. Yes. In 1967, the World Health Organization created the Intensified Smallpox Eradication Program, which targeted communities in Africa, Asia, and South America. In 1980, the WHO declared smallpox eradicated. In 2011, rinderpest was officially deemed eradicated after a vaccination campaign in 1994. Medical professionals today believe polio only to be a few years away from eradication after its first launch vaccine campaign in 1962. Recently, UNICEF has begun its fourth round of national polio immunization in December 2021, looking to direct vaccines to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Other diseases like tetanus, rabies, yellow fever, whooping cough, measles, and mumps are also close to eradication. However, diseases like measles and mumps have been making small comebacks in high unvaccinated populations. Smallpox has also caused concern to become a bioweapon agent. Smallpox as a bioweapon is not a new concept, as the British and American soldiers handed out smallpox blankets to Native American communities. OSHA states, quote, smallpox has been identified by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a Category A agent, meaning that it has been given high priority due to its potential threat to national security, end quote. Military personnel are often administered smallpox vaccinations to help combat smallpox biowarfare, if it ever occurred.
Now that we've heard the fascinating history of vaccines, what are some vaccine advancements that medical professionals and scientists today are looking forward to?
So science is ever evolving. As scientists and medical professionals discover new developments, things can and do change. Obviously, COVID is at the forefront of many scientific minds. Understanding COVID cannot and will not be a solid statement for quite some time. As it is a virus, it seeks to change and thrive, therefore changing the understood data about the virus. Because of its chameleon-like state, COVID vaccine data will also change to accommodate new discoveries and understandings. Another vaccine under experimentation currently is the mRNA HIV vaccine. This new vaccine has generated promising results after its animal trial. Scientists are hoping to move to the next level of human subjects within a year or two. Also, harkening back to another episode we did on malaria vaccines have been in experimentation since the 1960s. As of 2021, there is only one vaccine against malaria which requires 4 injections before immunity. The CDC has mapped out on their website their malaria vaccine goals by 2030 as, quote, develop and license malaria vaccines with protective efficacy of at least 75% against clinical malaria for areas with ongoing malaria transmission, and develop malaria vaccines that reduce transmission and human malaria infection, enabling elimination in multiple settings through mass vaccination campaigns, end quote. In conclusion, vaccines are crucial in the fight against disease and viruses. Again, though, data can be revised on how percentages change for herd immunity. The CDC reassures that they will continue to update and inform the public on disease control. If you're curious about more information on vaccine history, you can visit cdc.gov or historyofvaccines.org. I also highly suggest any episodes on vaccines by the fellow podcast, Sawbones, with Dr. Sydney and Justin McElroy.
So thanks, Makayla. We're always glad to have you on the podcast, especially on such a topical and fascinating subject where the more we know, the better we are prepared to deal with issues like vaccines.
You're welcome.
And we hope you enjoyed listening to Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds. We bring you historical episodes twice a month. If you did enjoy this or any other episodes of the podcast, please be sure to check out our Facebook page and YouTube channel, or stop by the Frontier Culture Museum itself for a visit. See you next time!